Greetings. I'm genuinely thankful that you've taken a moment to watch this video, and if you decide to subscribe to the channel, it would mean the world to me. Now, let's get started. My name is Jamie. You've probably heard that revenge is a dish best served cold. But what no one talks about is the deep gratification that comes from watching someone who tore your life apart slowly come to understand they've been methodically dismantled. When Kendall met my eyes outside that courthouse and called me the devil, I didn't so much as blink. I simply reminded her of a hard truth. She was the one who brought that side of me to life. That moment marked the end of a journey that spanned 7 years, and I wouldn't erase a single step of it. Kendall had a presence that drew people in. She stood at 5 feet 7 inches, graceful and effortlessly alluring. She could have had anyone she wanted. Even after years of marriage, I'd wake up next to her feeling like the most fortunate man alive. We met at a professional mixer, and her brilliant smile hooked me instantly. The early days of our life together felt like something out of a glossy magazine. We owned a spacious 4-bedroom house in one of the city's most desirable areas, complete with a garage big enough for 3 cars. I worked in commercial real estate development, specializing in properties that combined retail, residential, and office space. It was a lucrative industry, particularly during the surge in demand for upscale, walkable communities. Kendall didn't need to work. She filled her schedule with social events and causes that gave her a sense of purpose and public recognition. We were financially secure, far beyond the average couple our age. I had been cautious and strategic with money from the outset, investing in income-generating properties, high-performing stocks, municipal bonds, and vetted private equity funds. Our portfolio was diverse and structured through multiple entities to optimize tax benefits and protect our assets. We lived comfortably, not lavishly, but with a solid foundation of financial stability. Kendall had a general understanding of our wealth. She knew we were in a good place and that there was no cause for concern. The finer points of our finances didn't interest her, and I was content to handle those. In turn, she managed the home, cultivated our social life, and devoted herself to charitable work. It was a partnership that functioned well. I thrived in the world of business strategy, while she curated a lifestyle that not only enriched our personal lives, but also helped expand my professional reach. But over time, cracks began to form. The shift in our relationship wasn't abrupt. It crept in gradually. Kendall began spending more time away, taking private phone calls, and seemed increasingly distant, even when we were together. At first, the changes were small, nothing that raised immediate concern. She still performed all the rituals of married life, but there was a growing undercurrent of tension, a sense of separation that hadn't been there before. When I brought it up, her explanations were vague. She said her volunteer work had become more intense, that internal conflicts among team members were taking up more of her energy. It sounded plausible. She'd always been committed to those roles, so I accepted her explanation without pressing too hard. Still, as the weeks passed, the distance between us became harder to ignore. Our conversations grew utilitarian, focused on errands, appointments, and schedules. The emotional connection that had once been our bedrock began to erode. Physical closeness became rare, often dismissed by Kendall as exhaustion or stress. What disturbed me most wasn't her absence from our bed. It was her absence in the room, even when she was sitting right across from me. At dinner or during casual chats, I could sense her slipping away. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. One uneventful Saturday evening, with nowhere to go and no distractions to hide behind, I opened her favorite wine and gently asked for honesty. I told her I could feel something was deeply off, and pretending everything was fine was only driving a wedge between us. I reminded her that no matter what it was, we could face it together, if she was willing to let me in. She stuck to the same deflective script, brushing it off as my imagination, insisting that I was misinterpreting normal relationship ebb and flow as a sign of something darker, but I knew her too well to accept that. I saw the discomfort in her expression, the way she avoided sustained eye contact. I told her outright that I believed she was keeping something from me, something real, something serious. And then, at last, the truth surfaced. She broke down in tears and admitted she had been unfaithful, but the infidelity was only the surface of a much deeper issue. What followed was more disturbing than I could have anticipated. Between sobs, Kendall explained that the affair had begun several months earlier. It started innocently enough, an emotional connection that gradually crossed the line into something physical. But recently, the man she'd been involved with had turned manipulative and threatening. He had taken explicit photos of the two of them, images she believed were private, and now he was using them as leverage. He had begun blackmailing her. If she didn't comply, if she didn't continue to see him and provide him with money, he would release the photos. He threatened to send them to me, to her family, and even to the boards of the charities and social groups she was involved with. She was terrified, not just for herself, but for me, for our standing, for everything we'd built together. The demands from the man blackmailing her had escalated sharply, with each message pressuring her for increasingly large sums and threatening to leak explicit photos if she didn't comply. When I finally confronted her and asked who he was, her answer hit me like a blow. I knew him. He was someone she had casually introduced to me months before at a low-key get-together. At the time, I'd told her I was uneasy around him. His manner had struck me as too familiar, and their closeness had seemed off. She'd simply laughed at my concerns, assuring me he was just a friend and nothing more. Learning that she had cheated on me with the very man I had instinctively distrusted only made the betrayal deeper. She hadn't just ignored my warnings, she had continued her affair with him in secret, and now that hidden relationship had erupted into something criminal. As she revealed the full scope of what had happened, I had to force myself to stay calm, unwilling to let her see how much it had crushed me. This woman, whom I had given my trust and love to, hadn't just been unfaithful. She had become entangled in a dangerous situation with precisely the kind of person I had begged her to avoid. Despite how devastating it was, I understood that I had to focus on the immediate danger. No matter how this situation had started, she was now the target of blackmail, a serious crime. Her safety had to come first, regardless of how much her own decisions had contributed to this outcome. I told her we needed to involve my attorney immediately and notify the authorities. She was hesitant, worried about the shame and legal complications that might follow if it all became public. But I made it clear, giving in to blackmail only feeds it. The only viable option was to pursue legal recourse and bring her extorter to justice. I promised we'd handle everything with the utmost discretion. My lawyer was experienced in managing sensitive matters like this and knew how to protect privacy. With the help of law enforcement, he used the evidence Kendall had kept, threatening texts, payment records, to begin building a case. The investigation moved quickly. Authorities obtained warrants for the suspect's digital devices and financial records, uncovering concrete proof of his misconduct. The compromising images were also recovered and securely removed from his control, ensuring he couldn't weaponize them again. When David was finally arrested, he denied all wrongdoing, insisting that the money was a gift and that their relationship had been consensual from start to finish. But the digital trail told a very different story, explicit messages in which he threatened to publish the images unless she paid him. Over the course of several months, the case proceeded, and in the end, he accepted a plea bargain, admitting to his crimes in exchange for a lighter sentence. The immediate legal threat was over, and Kendall was no longer under active extortion. But the emotional damage was irreversible. Once the case wrapped up, Kendall began pleading for another chance. She was terrified I'd leave her and desperate to repair what was left between us. I seriously contemplated ending our marriage then and there. Her infidelity was difficult enough to accept, but the fact that she had chosen to cheat with the very man I had warned her about made it feel like a direct slap in the face. It wasn't just betrayal. It felt like deliberate disregard for my judgment, my instincts, and our vows. As I weighed my options, though, I started looking at the situation more rationally. Over the years, we had built significant wealth together, and an immediate divorce would likely result in her walking away with a large share of it. If I filed now, when emotions were raw and the affair still fresh, she could legally claim nearly half of everything, including assets I had worked hard to earn. That would mean losing millions to someone who had already proven she didn't value what we had. It became increasingly clear that a more strategic approach was necessary. Delaying the divorce would give me time to restructure our finances and protect more of what I had built. It would require careful planning, expert legal advice, and patience, but it was the smarter move in the long run. Kendall had disregarded both our relationship and my warnings. I saw no reason not to look out for my own interests from this point forward. When she brought up the idea of marriage counseling, hoping to salvage the relationship, I agreed without hesitation. Therapy would provide the perfect cover, allowing me time to reorganize our financial position and show any future court that I had genuinely tried to repair things. I played the role of a supportive husband convincingly, burying my resentment and acting as though I was committed to reconciliation. Kendall seemed genuinely relieved by my apparent willingness to work through the aftermath. She called it the lowest point in her life, and she clung to my support with visible gratitude. Meanwhile, I was quietly coordinating with my lawyer and financial advisors, carefully initiating a series of steps designed to secure our assets behind legally sound protections. Every action we took was crafted to appear above board, justified business decisions, not blatant attempts to obscure wealth in anticipation of a divorce. I began forming new corporate structures and reallocating investments into vehicles optimized for tax advantages and legal shielding. Where Kendall had some involvement in our financial affairs, I explained the changes as necessary to protect us from future lawsuits or economic volatility. Over the next several months, I executed these changes gradually and methodically. Each move was supported by legitimate documentation and practical explanations. Kendall was kept informed, enough to believe she was in the loop, but never enough to understand the full implications. She signed off on what she believed were smart financial decisions, unaware that these very actions would eventually limit what she could claim if our marriage ended. Gaining Kendall's signature on the key legal documents required a careful presentation. Each paper was described as a standard formality, part of a larger, routine corporate restructuring. Because she had long entrusted me with managing our financial affairs, she signed without hesitation or scrutiny. One of the most consequential documents she approved was a power of attorney, which granted me sweeping authority over our joint assets and business interests. I characterized it as a procedural necessity to simplify the reorganization, and she accepted that explanation without consulting her own lawyer. During this phase, we remained engaged in couples therapy, following the steps advised by our therapist to rebuild trust and improve communication. Kendall was genuinely invested in the process, eager to believe that we could recover from the damage and rebuild our relationship. She often voiced gratitude that I hadn't left her when things were at their worst, thanking me repeatedly for choosing to stay and fight for our marriage. Her remorse over the affair appeared sincere, and she seemed determined to prove she could be trusted again. I played the role of the wounded yet optimistic husband, offering comfort and understanding. But behind that facade, I was working toward a very different goal, preserving the financial legacy I had spent my life constructing. The financial restructuring itself was complex and demanded precise coordination between my legal team, my accountant, and investment advisors. Every action had to be meticulously recorded and grounded in valid business purposes to ensure it couldn't be legally challenged later. Part of the approach involved transferring ownership of key assets into entities where Kendall held no stake. Other elements relied on international investments and offshore accounts that added layers of legal and geographic insulation. Though entirely above board and properly documented, these steps were designed to make any future claim on those assets exceedingly difficult. Over nearly 6 years, I executed this strategy methodically while maintaining the external appearance of a devoted partner committed to reconciliation. Kendall never raised concerns about the financial adjustments. Everything was framed as routine efforts to optimize our portfolio and reduce tax exposure. She remained focused on healing our relationship and seemed genuinely content with the progress we were making. By the time I was satisfied that every asset was secure and shielded, she was convinced we had successfully rebuilt our marriage. She believed we had emerged stronger from the wreckage of her infidelity. That was when I filed for divorce. The filing came as a complete shock to her. She was home when the documents were delivered, and she called me immediately, panicked and bewildered, desperate to understand why I would end things after all the effort we had invested in therapy. I remained composed and told her the truth. I had never fully forgiven her. Therapy had been my way of determining whether reconciliation was even possible. Now I knew it wasn't. I said it was time to move forward and begin a new chapter in my life, one without her. Once she hired an attorney, it didn't take long for her to realize that the financial foundation she thought she still had access to was no longer within her grasp. Years of legal and financial maneuvers had placed nearly all of our wealth under my sole control. The power of attorney she had once signed gave me exclusive authority over those assets. Without my consent, she couldn't access them. She quickly found herself excluded from the financial world she had comfortably relied on throughout our marriage. Eventually, she retained a lawyer who agreed to work on a contingency basis, but it soon became clear that her legal standing was fragile. The financial structures I had put in place were not only legitimate, but also established slowly, each step grounded in business logic. Her legal team tried to challenge the transfers, claiming they had been designed to deprive her of her share of the marital estate. But the timeline, the paperwork, and the compliance with legal standards rendered their arguments ineffective. As the court battle dragged on, the full extent of what I had done became clear to her. The counseling sessions, the apparent emotional progress, the shared efforts to rebuild, it had all been part of a calculated plan to safeguard my financial interests. With every failed legal motion, her frustration deepened. The same woman who had betrayed our vows and dismissed my warnings was now reaping the consequences of placing blind trust in someone who had quietly prepared for her fall. The litigation extended for more than a year, with her attorneys contesting each aspect of the financial arrangements and trying to dismantle the legal framework I had built. But none of their efforts succeeded in breaching the careful defenses I had established. By the time the divorce was finalized, the settlement she received was a shadow of what she might have walked away with had I taken action immediately after her affair. Instead of leaving with a sizable portion of our wealth, she departed with enough only to support a modest lifestyle, far from what she had envisioned. On the day our divorce was officially concluded, I saw her outside the courthouse. She glared at me with pure hatred, calling me a monster, accusing me of coldly orchestrating the destruction of her life. Her voice shook with rage as she unleashed years of pent-up emotion. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her exactly what I believed, that it was her betrayal, her dismissal of my warnings, that had created the man standing before her. I reminded her that every step I had taken was lawful, and that she had willingly approved each financial move along the way. She had trusted me with our money, just as I had once trusted her with our marriage. In the end, both of us paid the price for trusting the wrong person. As I walked away from that courthouse, I wasn't overcome by happiness or triumph, only a cold, unshakable sense of resolution. Every choice I had made, every quiet calculation, had led me precisely to that moment. The woman who deceived me, ironically with the very man I had warned her to avoid, ultimately faced the repercussions of her betrayal. The 7 years I devoted to engineering and executing my strategy proved to be a masterstroke of patience and planning. While Kendall had dismantled our marriage with her disloyalty, I quietly unraveled her financial stability through deliberate and calculated precision. Some might interpret my actions as ruthless or overdrawn. I see them differently, as justice, long delayed but finally delivered. She made a decision to betray the foundation of our bond, and I made a decision about how to respond. The difference between us? I was thinking 10 steps ahead, fully aware of the cost and payoff of every decision I made. There was a time when she seemed like the kind of woman who could make you believe in forever. But what she actually gave me was a series of brutal truths, lessons about trust, disloyalty, and the danger of investing in those who only look out for themselves. Yes, she broke my heart. But in that destruction, she created a colder, sharper version of me, someone far better suited to handle the aftermath she left behind. Today, I stand free, financially secure and emotionally unbound from a woman who proved she was never worthy of my devotion. The so-called monster she claimed I became, that was her doing, not mine. She made her choices. I simply became what those choices required. People say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. I believe it's best served with care, with patience, and with a keen eye for detail. Kendall decided to gamble recklessly with our relationship. I chose to master the long game, one move at a time. In the end, we both had to live with what we'd set in motion. The difference? My strategy was airtight. Hers was impulsive and sloppy. And when the dust settled, the scoreboard wasn't measured in fleeting thrills or passionate moments. It was tallied in assets, in financial wins, in the cold, hard truth of outcomes. Her affair? A meaningless fling with a man who eventually ended up behind bars. My revenge? Quiet, legal, devastatingly effective. She once painted me as the villain. But by the time she realized the truth, that sometimes the villain is simply the one who played smarter, it was too late. She had awakened a part of me she couldn't understand and certainly couldn't defeat. That shadow she stirred in me, it learned, adapted, and ultimately thrived in the silence she left behind. And so, our chapter closes. Feel free to share your reflections in the comments below. If this story struck a chord with you, consider exploring more on this channel. Until next time, be well.